Hi, I'm Dr. Ben Bravery, a doctor training and specialising in Sydney, Australia. But I wasn't always a doctor. My pathway to medicine was a little unusual, actually. It all started when I was 28 years old and I was diagnosed with advanced bowel cancer, stage 3 colorectal cancer. That happened on the background of no family history, but symptoms that I had basically ignored for the best part of 6 months. And I did that because when you're 28 years old and you're otherwise very healthy, a bit of constipation, diarrhea, some abdominal pain can be explained away by other things. I was living in China at the time, and I often ate at restaurants that probably weren't the cleanest and restaurants I probably shouldn't have. And so I explained away my symptoms until I couldn't. Eventually, I started bleeding. It's not like it happened every single time I went to the bathroom, but it started to happen enough that I became very scared. I lost weight, I got night sweats, I fainted. It was time for me to accept what was going on. I told my parents, as you do, and my mum organised a colonoscopy. Now I had to fly back to Australia for the colonoscopy, but I had plans to only be in Australia for a week, maximum, in order to have the scope, get my visa, and get back to China, where I was building a business as a zoologist, a researcher of wildlife, and where I had just fallen in love with what would become my wife many years later. But sadly, I never made it back to China. A colonoscopy found a large tumour in the sigmoid. My first question, of course, was what was a sigmoid? And after learning that it was a part of the large bowel, and then seeing photos of the tumour, I understood for the first time fully what was going on inside me. I was dying. Now, this was quite a shock. Cancer at any age is devastating. At 28, it takes on a whole new kind of sinister future. For example, my career stopped in its tracks. My love life stopped in its tracks. I was pulled out of the rat race, so to speak, and my full-time job became staying alive. My cancer was complicated because it was advanced and it was wrapped around several organs. That meant that I needed radiation therapy for 6 weeks before surgery, then an ultra-low anterior resection, an open laparotomy, I had an ileostomy, and then I had post-operative chemotherapy for about 5 months, at the end of which I was diagnosed with bilateral pulmonary emboli, or blood clots in the lungs, and then had to go and be anticoagulated. At the end of treatment, having been declared no evidence of disease, I was spat back into the world, suddenly and emotionally. In order to get my life back on track, I raced back to work. My finances were gone. My business in Beijing had dissolved. With my partner by my side, we had to rebuild. And so I got a job doing science communication in Sydney. But after 6 months, I got bored and frustrated. Something wasn't right. So I changed jobs, thinking that that was the solution. But again, 6 months in, something didn't feel right. So I did something dramatic, and I just stopped everything. I took a year off to let the cancer catch up with me. Not only did I still have peripheral neuropathy, not only was I still adapting to my new anatomy, but something had shifted inside me. I needed to do something different. I needed to do something big. So I decided to go and retrain as a doctor. Now, the decision to become a doctor was a huge one. I went to medical school at 32. In Australia, the graduate program is 4 years long. It's intense. Again, my partner had to support me through that process. I wanted to go and become a doctor for 2 reasons. The first one was I was so grateful for the people that had saved me. I had excellent doctors and nurses at different points in my care. I had world-class treatments over and over again, and I was alive. And the benefit of the universal healthcare system in Australia means that I didn't pay a cent for that. The second reason is a little harder to talk about, And that's despite that gratitude, I felt that some parts of healthcare were lacking. While being cared for, I didn't feel a lot of care at times. It was as though the humanity was lacking. It's as though at times the system was designed to exploit my vulnerability, to exacerbate my distress, not nurture me, and not help me be the best patient possible. So armed with these ideas, I took myself to medical school, and I was shocked. I was disappointed in the way that medical education unfolded. It was hostile at times. It was unnecessarily competitive. I felt that we had selected a group of people who did deserve to be there, but they were there because of a very particular skill, and that skill is being able to study very, very hard for hours at a time and memorize facts, often at the expense of other skills like empathy, leadership, compassion, communication. I accepted that, and that was okay if medical school then went and helped you develop those skills as a junior doctor. But often they didn't. When I consulted the literature about what I was observing and what I was feeling, I found that this pattern was well known. Whether you do a study in Saudi Arabia, in China, or the US, the more time doctors spend in education, the more cynical they become. The poorer they become at communicating, the less empathy that they express to their patients. It occurred to me we weren't really training healers, the kinds of healers that patients demand and deserve. We were training something else. Now, as someone who had almost died and then gone to medical school, I was in an unusual position. I learnt illness, having been ill. I filtered everything through the patient lens. I was a patient in that lecture theatre. I was a patient on ward rounds. The doctor stuff was secondary. And I think that allowed me to put things in perspective. It allowed me also to evaluate what I thought was good about medical education and what I thought was lacking. A big thing I noticed that were lacking were patience. Now, they're kind of there in our textbooks, in PowerPoint presentations. They're there on ward rounds. But I longed to see patients elevated to professors, the patient professor. I wanted to see people with lived experience like I had lived, up at the front of the lecture hall, teaching us about what it was like to live with illness, what illness felt like, what having to take large regimes of medication did and meant to their lives. But sadly, that information wasn't valued. And I felt that that was remiss of medical education, because to me it seems like an antidote to the kinds of patterns that I've described, that drop in empathy, that decline in compassion. It's a way to remain centered into the human experience, the illness experience, the experience of people that we would then go on and be treating. Now in my practice, I still feel like a patient. I joke that I'm a patient that gets to wear a stethoscope. I walk into the hospital as a patient with a medical degree. I model patient-centered behaviour each and every interaction, or at least I try to, because then what I found when I was working was that the system sometimes makes it very difficult to provide quality care, to provide empathy and validation, to hold the hand of a patient in need, to answer endless questions from concerned family members. These kinds of things which are deeply valued by patients and are often the subjects of complaints are not rewarded by the hospital system. In fact, we're not incentivized to engage in this kind of care at all. And to me, that was one of the greatest omissions on the back of a medical education system that again didn't really put patients at the center. I found myself working as a junior doctor, again, with patients not at the center. So last year I put these ideas together. I put my unique experience together in a book called The Patient Doctor. The idea was to help patients and doctors better understand each other, because I think at the heart of it, they want the same thing. A doctor wants to feel purpose and satisfaction with the care they're delivering. Yes, they want to be excellent technically, and of course that's fundamental to doctoring. But they also want to be so much more, often, to the people who are ill and fragile around them. Patients want more. No longer are they satisfied with the doctor knowing everything and just spewing information at them. They want to be a part of decision making. They want to feel like they're in the driver's seat of their care. And to me, deficits in the system, both at hospitals and medical education and patient engagement, explain a lot of the gaps in the doctor-patient relationship. To me, better understanding of both sides, partnering together to demand better, is the only way that the system can bring about real change.